I think it's always very, very, very much worth reinforcing just how bad the situation really is for the Tory party, because they are about to start their conference. And at their conference, what is being, well, at least being put forward to the members, is meant to be a beauty pageant, a selection of these four particular members who are going to come parade themselves to you, the Conservative membership, who eventually you'll get a choice of one of these two. And quite frankly, we don't know what's going to happen. When they do their speeches, whoever comes out on top of these speeches potentially will go into the final four, and it will who comes out really to be the best speaker. David Cameron, this happened to him in 2005, considered to be not really someone who would maybe win the leadership. He had some, interesting ideas, but it wasn't really the time for such radical ideas as trying to detoxify the party's images as it was way back then. Again, oh, how times have changed since 2005, right? But no, he gave this very, very well received speech at that conference, and the momentum carried him right through to the leadership. Will this happen to someone in the next coming weeks? That is possibly quite likely. However, I am personally hoping that what is going to happen is that this turns into a massive mudslinging match, that things get a bit brutal, that the Conservative Party civil war does break open, and quite frankly, this Conservative convention turns into an absolutely stunning mess. The type of catastrophe which you look upon a building and think, wow, this is a 4-story catastrophe with some very nice, intricate fillings on the entrance. But we can but hope that is what happens. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very boring. Like I say, I do apologize that the Conservative leadership contest hasn't been as interesting as even I had hoped. It started off with such hopefuls, but no, it didn't. But who knows? There's still time. There's still time for it to happen. And then there's the after the conference, the after the election as well. And oh boy, will there be an after the election as well? That's for sure. Anyway, one moment. So, with that said, I think it is worth once again reminding you all just not of what really is at stake and how bad the Conservative Party really is at the moment, but also to remind you just how bad the selection of candidates really is open to the Tory party and potentially who the final two may very well indeed be. Before we do go getting into that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can help buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, thank you very much to everyone who does help support the channel. Even if you do just click the like and share button, leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. So, this was in The Guardian, and there's a couple of points here, as we said, well worth reminding you all really the state of the Conservative Party. I mean, so this is where it really is. So at the best of times, party conferences can feature now scenes of very dogmatic self-indulgence and cultural insolence. In the aftermath of a historic mauling by electorate, a retreat into an ideological comfort zone is almost practically assured. It would take a very brave and exceptionally talented politician to defy that tendency and still enjoy the affections of the crowd. None of the contenders meet that criteria. And that's really one of the biggest trouble points that not a lot of people have really mentioned. That if you look at like who's left in the Tory party, none of them are that good. None of them actually are good politicians. None of them are capable of navigating the situation they are in, except almost continuing as a status quo, as if the loss, a historic mauling, to use that term just used there, just should be ignored and just continue as if, well, don't worry, we'll be back next election, we'll win next time. Bear in mind, this is exactly how the Conservatives behaved in and after 1997. Oh, don't worry, we'll be back next election. And they weren't. They weren't for some time. And I do believe they will not be back for some time as well after this. Because, oh boy, we'll get into it later. They think, reform's their problem. As we've said many times before, it's not. It's really not their problem. But before we jump onto that, the candidates, because they also align who these candidates are. So, notionally, Tugendhat is the most leftmost candidate. He represents the Tory One Nation tradition. And that is true. If you were going for leftmost candidate, again, I know Tory party and all that, but Tugendhat is the most leftmost candidate. He is a One Nation Tory. He comes from that faction of the party. Honestly, he is not going to win. And as early as it's going to come in later on, he has completely jumped the shark. If he had come back from like the post Boris Johnson, he had really rode hard and doubled down on his message that he was sending at that particular leadership election, maybe I would be saying, well, actually, here's Tom Tugendhat. He's being very brave in tackling the Tory ideological comfort zone. Would it make him a good politician? Well, tell you what, he'd have to really prove his chops. But of course, he ain't running that type of campaign. Instead, he's running a completely ludicrous one. And we'll get into that in a moment. Jerick is also running now as the standard bearer for the hard right, although Badenoch also competes for that status. That ultimately would not surprise me if that is the final two. However, there are talks of Badenoch being squeezed out. If that happens, and Jerick makes it to the final two, Jerick wins. The only person that we've seen in the polls that Jerick cannot beat is Badenoch. And the Tory party wants Badenoch hard. They want her. So, back to this. While also cleverly does tilt at least more moderate, the reality now that those lines are blurred. Tugendhat is, of course, a former Remainer who now indulges in the radical Eurosceptic delusion that Britain might leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Cleverly has pledged to bring back the ill-fated scheme to deport asylum claimants to Rwanda, despite reportedly dismissing the project as batshit when in government. Jerick was a Tory moderniser who was in the mould of David Cameron when that was the dominant faction. He then followed his ambition ever rightwards since, and there is now scarce any evidence there's much in the way of principles beyond self-advancement. And yet, bear in mind, that is the guy who potentially is likely to win. Bear in mind that that is the guy who has blown with the wind wherever it happens to be and is very, very interested in his own self-advancement. Do you think that's really a good person to be leader? Not even mentioning the huge amount of scandals that Jerick has been involved in. Like, you can even just put those scandals to one side for a moment. Do you really think electing a guy who is only interested in self-advancement, good leader? And then Badenoch, a habit now of starting culture wars, appears to now arise from a very sincere conviction, but also is now marginal to the task of bringing her party back towards the electoral mainstream. If they elect Badenoch, she's going to start culture wars. These are not mainstream. The mainstream has rejected time and time again the importation of the culture wars and culture war arguments that Badenoch has engaged massively in. The UK voting public is just simply not interested in voting for things like these. They ain't interested. It's not vote winning. And even in America, where at one time that was at least something that would win votes, nowadays, not so much. And yet Badenoch is insistent. And I do agree. It does seem to come from some sort of very sincere conviction about her, but she's wrong. Very, very much wrong on that. And that is the Tory candidates. Not a single one of them, not a single one has anything to say about anything that would mean real change. We're talking public policy, public services, you know, the entire 14 years worth of failure of the Tory party, about why they lose, why that you've had this previous succession of Tory prime ministers that have been just awful. None of them are there. None of them. And we are going to be here again. We already talked about Will Atkinson's article saying, are we going to be doing this whole merry-go-round again? Well, yes. Yes, you absolutely are. Because Jerrick will not last long. Whoever wins will not last long. Because there was a poll not too long ago which put each one of these people up against Keir Starmer, asking who's your more favourable Prime Minister. Keir Starmer beat every single one by a very big, substantial margin. You know, that's just how bad it is, really, and they can't even admit it. But that's the selection process they've got. It's just a dire selection, and a dire selection from start to finish, non-stop, pure insanity. And even then, the whole infighting, civil warring, that's not going to end. That's not going to end at all. Because if Jerrick loses to Badenoch, who do you think he is going to go after? And I've said this before. Kimmy Badenoch does not have friends. She has frenemies. She has a habit of making enemies left, right, and center. If she gets to the top, she's going to have a massive target on her back. And there's going to be plenty of people who will have no problems trying to, rattle the pole to knock her off the top. Especially someone like Robert Jerrick, who would love to go, oh, next Tory contest, this is mine to win. That's if, of course, they end up in the final two. And who knows what that might be. But I just want to finish it off on this because I think this is incredibly poignant as well. So the Tories' ignominious collapse in July ought to end the talk of being the natural party of government. The prevailing narrative of defeat has been a lament of insufficient vigor of cracking down on immigration. And that's what we've seen. The only reason they lost was because they did not crack down on immigration hard enough. The UK's problems are not caused by immigration, or shall we say, the lack of not being cracking hard enough down on immigration. But that's what they do. And I do agree. This defeat should really end any talk in the party of being the natural party of government. We've had them for 14 years. And yet they left the UK in a far, far worse state. They went through with the horrific decision to do Brexit, Liz Truss, the mini budget, how they acted through COVID, all that stuff. And yet, oh, we're the natural party of government. And then, of course, it gets even worse. So, that expressed terror of using of losing yet even more support to Nigel Farage's Reform UK. It also says nothing to those voters who cost the Scories tours of seats by switching to the Liberal Democrats, often in dismay at the slide towards Faragism is now already too far gone. And I keep on bringing this up. Yes, it's right. They are terrified of Farage, but their real enemy is the Liberal Democrats, who have their eye on becoming the third largest party. And over the next couple of years, going up to the next election, that's their goal. That's their aim. And so long as the Tories ignore them and just focus on reform, then the Liberal Democrats are going to have the Tories' lunch. Absolutely 100%. 100%. And at that conference, you are going to see the streets of Birmingham flooded with denial. You know, it ain't just a river in Africa. You are going to see it in Birmingham. Denial, denial, denial that the Tory party is in such an awful state. Meanwhile, of course, they will slide off into a lot of obscurity. And of course, what we really need to happen is for the Lib Dems to become the main party of opposition. That will be a lot better, I think, for the country as a whole when that eventually happens. And honestly, that may very well happen. Because obviously this happened to the Liberal Party when, you know, the Tories and Labour were there. The Liberal Party got pushed very, very much to the sidelines and sort of went away. It almost died as a party in many ways. But that's what happened in you know, in the 1920s. That could very well now be repeated again, but for the Tories being pushed into third place to a situation where they cannot recover from. And I really do believe they are just in an irredeemable, irrecoverable situation. Because who do you go for? Who's left in the party who is actually a good, credible politician who could bring the party back? There's no one. There's no one, or at least they haven't made themselves known. But they are in denial about why they lost, about all the problems that is internal in their party, their policies, their past 14 years in government. But don't worry, they'll be telling themselves in Birmingham, because I can guarantee you now, each one of those 4 leadership candidates on stage, publicly, will tell their audience that they can win the next general election. But at no point will they tell them how they intend to win the next general election, what policies is going to be on offer. So that is just the dire state of the Conservative Party conference that is going to go in. And I hope it ends up being just a wonderful catastrophe, because it would be a laugh a minute riot. It really, really would. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.